If parenthood came with a GPS, it would most likely just say recalculating. Join Yolandi Becker and her guest experts Wednesdays at 11 a.m. for Bump and Beyond, the show about pregnancy and babies. 101.9 megahertz of life.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. It is me, Yolandi Becker, your host today for Bump and Beyond. And of course, as always, we talk parenting and the fun, the blessings, the hardships, everything that goes with it. But as we all know, I think that's the one place, and I think it's also relevant with all situations, not just with parenting, is we are allowed to feel more than one feeling at the same time. Even if it's two opposing feelings, we are allowed to do so. Today's show is going to be a good one again, because I am joined again by one of my all-time favorite guests, Galya Falkson. But today we are talking the talk with our kids. And I actually, a while ago, saw a funny video on social media about we definitely have it harder than our parents, because they only needed to do the birds and the bees talk with us. We need to do the birds and the bees talk, the birds and the birds talk, the bees and the bees talk, the birds who want to become bees talk, the birds who don't know if they like bees or birds talk. So it's a slightly more complicated situation. I do apologize if my joke offended anyone, but I assure you, if it is offensive, it is due to ignorance. And this is why this conversation today is so important. It's a new world we're living in, and we need to learn how to navigate it by having these important discussions amongst ourselves and, of course, also with our children. In all honesty, the talking about sex and sexuality and sexual identity has been very natural in my own household. There's various things that I think added to that. One of the things is that we have a quite diverse group of friends, which helps to normalize certain situations. And of course, I'm also not the average kind of parent. Because of my job, I read an unusual amount of parenting information. And so I am, I guess, overly informed in certain ways. And I think those things definitely contributed to it. But a big part of the contribution is also my own experience with sex and sexuality. And I grew up in a very conservative Afrikaans household. And it was kind of, I guess, I was constantly told things like, you have to wait until marriage, till you have sex, and it's a sacred thing, and all these statements, even though I do agree with some of it, to be honest, the way it was kind of sold to me made me feel ashamed and guilty when I actually myself started having sex. And it took me, honestly, even while I was married, years to kind of let go of this guilt and shame, and it made it less enjoyable for me. And this is something I did not want for my children. I wanted them to have a lot more healthy openness with that regard. So it's a contribution, like I said, of various things that have kind of opened up the conversation for my kids. Adding to this, of course, research shows that having access to sexual and reproductive education and rights can decrease child marriage, decrease teenage pregnancies, and prevent transmission of sexually transmitted infections. And to be honest, come on, sex and sexuality surrounds us constantly. You cannot, unless you put your child in a box, avoid sex and sexuality. And with the internet, especially, your kids will be exposed to it. A third, I'm not even joking, a third of all information on the internet is pornographic. That's so your child is going to be exposed to some form of sex or sexuality. And why would you want them to be educated through the internet? No, you want to have these conversations with your children so that they are open, so they receive open and honest and reliable information from you. You want to be the source of this conversation and not, I don't even know, I want to use the word perverse, but inappropriate, non-realistic things that pornographic things that are on the internet should not be their frame of reference when it comes to these things. And as you can see, I'm already getting nicely on my soapbox about this issue, because I think it is an issue that we also are afraid to talk about. Again, I even said in the show before with Galya, I told her that I think people don't like talking about this, but we are going to be talking about the passionate certified sex and relationship coach, Galya Falkson, all about having the talk just now after this break.
This is Bump and Beyond with Yolandi Becker, the show about pregnancy and babies, 101.9 megahertz of life.
If you've just joined me, of course, you are on Bump and Beyond with me, your host, Yolandi Becker. And today we are talking about sex and sexuality with our children. And as always, Carol, if you're out there, please do send in some messages. But we want you all to be talking with us. And the telephone number, of course, that you can phone is 010-140-3020. You can SMS us at 34519 or send us a telegram on 061-895-1019. Our new app is obviously available for you to download. It's not so new anymore, so I should probably not use the word new anymore. But you can easily access and interact with us also from the app. So please go have a look at that, of course, as well. So I want you to share your own experience. Even if you're a grandma out there, was it an awkward conversation to have with your children? Was it fine? Are you happy with what you've done? Do you feel there was something that you could have done differently? Share with us your own experience with the talk. As I said, with me, it was various things that kind of added to it, but I am talking way too much and we have an expert here for a reason. So hello, Galya. Thank you again for joining me.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It's always nice to chat with you. Unfortunately, not in studio today, but nevertheless, if you haven't followed Galya yet on Instagram, she is super entertaining and great. So you need to go follow her on Instagram. It's a good follow to do. She's got lots of insightful tips and everything. So let's get to the point. I now mentioned to me why I feel it's important and how I kind of spoke to my kids about, I didn't share yet how I spoke to them, but that it was relatively easy and it kind of naturally kind of progressed. What is the talk according to you, and why do you feel it is important?
So, well, you mentioned earlier that awkward talk that our parents gave us about the birds and the bees. Well, we're not doing that anymore. Today that is not appropriate. And you made the joke about we have to talk about all the different things. It's actually not even, we're not talking about bees and bees. We're actually not using those terms anymore. We're actually just talking about human beings. And we're not going to just focus on one big talk that actually just creates so much anxiety for parents. It's embarrassing for the children. It actually makes it quite awkward and creates actually more shame than we're intending. And it's not always that most empowering way of having a conversation with our kids. The way the way we should be educating our children is through an ongoing conversation around healthy, age-appropriate elements of sexuality. The topic of sex should not be taboo. Unfortunately, it still is in a lot of spaces. And all that shame, fear, and embarrassment actually just needs to fall away. Because if we want to raise children who are empowered through their sexuality and enable them to go on and build those deep bonds through their adult lives, then we need to start discussing sex from birth. And
Yeah.
some people think that, no, maybe that's too early, but there's actually age-appropriate ways to start beginning the discussion around their bodies and protection and safety, etc., that all lead up to different aspects and different elements of the talk that you're going to be having ongoingly throughout their childhood development up until their teen years.
And I mean, that's exactly what I was meaning with the natural kind of progression. Again, I shouldn't call myself, I mean, I'm not a non-average parent. Of course, I also have the same troubles and things like that. But in the end, I am unusually informed, for lack of a better word, because I interact in the child space all the time and with different people, which is a privilege, of course, also sometimes a curse. Sometimes you don't want to know certain things. But that is really how it was for me as well, kind of the natural progression of talking, just also body awareness, because even for me, like by the time you become a teenager, you're a little bit, your body is awkward and it's like you're not comfortable with how it looks and you're feeling your boobs are not big enough, your hair is too curly, you're tall and lanky. I'm now talking here absolutely about myself. And I feel you have to start creating that body awareness already with your child from when they're small, so that they know also the differences between their bodies and other people's bodies. And I think it's a beautiful progression. But often, like you said, lots of people don't like talking about sex and they're not comfortable with talking about it, because a big myth as well that I feel is out there with lots of things, it's not even just about sex, is that people feel also, even if you talk about sexuality, not just sex, that people think that if I have this talk now with my kids, I'm giving them ideas. Now they're going to become all of a sudden, I don't know, gay and it's like you become it. Obviously, we know better than this. But in the end of the day, we're going to start having sex because now we've told them about it. Is that a valid fear, or what do you feel about that?
So I want to take one step back and I just want to address something. It's quite difficult for parents to sometimes have this topic due to the fact that they may have lack of education. Like you said, they'll assume that it's going to cause or lead to something. So there's that lack of education. There's that religious repression that is very much brought into our lives, that internalized trauma, fear, secrecy, guilt, embarrassment, right? This predominantly viewed that that sex is male dominated, and it's left us quite nervous when it comes to talking about this topic. So the first thing that any parent needs to do before having these conversations is actually to ask themselves, what are their barriers? What is stopping them from being able to have this conversation? One, we're going to explain why they should be and why the benefits of it. But once they understand those benefits, what is blocking me? What is in my way to actually having an open dialogue, being able to have this open dialogue, speaking in a way that is age appropriate and beautiful for children as we progress in their lifetimes. And then, just to take it one step further, then parents also need to ask themselves, are there words that I'm uncomfortable saying? Is it hard for me to say the word sex? Can I say penis? Can I say vagina? Am I able to name anatomically correct parts of the body? Use the anatomically correct. Sorry, I don't know what I'm saying today. Anatomically correct words for the body. And, if it's difficult for you to say them, consider why. Consider what was taught to you, what happened, where are those blockages come from, and work on yourself to break those down, to be able to have these conversations even better with your children. And the reason I want you to focus on this before I answer your question is because think about this. Do you want the same thing for your child? Do you want your child to have the same experience that you're having? Absolutely not. So if you don't want that for your child, you have to break that down first in order to have this conversation with them, right? Do I want my children to be in this place of shame and guilt and embarrassment? Or can I easily have a conversation that's healthy, that's age appropriate?
I see this is going to be a great conversation. I hope we're going to have enough time because, again, we need to take a small break, but don't go anywhere. Lots of good adverts coming up.
This is Bump and Beyond with Yolandi Becker, the show about pregnancy and babies. 101.9 megahertz of life.
If you've just joined me, you are on Bump and Beyond, and I am your host, Yolandi Becker, and I am talking to passionate certified sex and relationship coach Galya Falkson, who's also a mother of 3 boys. And we're talking about that talk we need to have with our children, the sex talk. And I think you've already, Galya, in the break, I even said to you, it's always so easy also and comfortable, this awkward conversation, not that I feel I'm awkward about it, but again, just taking a step back, as you mentioned, is like, how do you expect to have this talk, this seemingly awkward talk, with your children if you can't even say the word sex or vagina or penis yourself, and you're having to talk to about, and to actually self-reflect and take a step back before you have the talk, I think is so important. But that brings us now to the actual question that I was asking. Is it going to be causing them, if we now have the talk with them, is it going to cause them to have more sex? Is it going to cause them to become something different than what they actually are?
Yeah. So there is this large misconception that by addressing sex bodies and pleasure, we're actually going to be encouraging our children to explore this behavior. However, in recent studies, and actually there's multiple studies, it was revealed that children who had parents that held frequent, honest, and open discussions about sex and sexuality actually delayed their children's sexual engagement, and it encouraged safer sex when compared to the others who did not. This is because children who healthily have open discourse and learn about the body positively, the same way we can say nose, we can say penis, right? The same way we say ears, we can say vagina. And they learn about it in a positive, natural understanding and a natural way, as opposed to children who seek out that information because their parents aren't giving it to them. So either they get it from their friends or porn or the internet or the television, and so on. And those portrayals of sex are so unhealthy and so unrealistic that their education is now coming from very unreliable, unhealthy sources. So your child will seek it out. It's inevitable. We are humans. We are sexual beings. So you want to almost know that I have the ability to equip my children with accurate, real information, and this will help them actually choose healthy relationships and choose a healthy way of addressing sex, which is actually in and of itself that, this whole idea of like abstinence, that doesn't come from telling someone to abstain. It actually comes from educating them and showing them so that they can make those healthy choices on their own in a way that is actually safe, good, and empowering for them.
And you want them. For me, it's like, and that's what you were saying, that do you want as a parent your child to have the same experience? And in essence, you want them to make that choice, because in the end of the day, it remains their choice in the matter, and they need to be able to make it informed either with someone else, consensually, of course, with someone else, but that they know those type of things. And the best source of information is you. Again, like you mentioned, though, if you are ready to have this conversation. So I love that, because I think that is so important for parents to know as well, that because it's inevitable. I just think of some of the education I had, and it's even mainstream. I watched Dawson's Creek when I was a child. Yes, now I'm starting to tell people how old I am. But that's a reality, isn't it? And it was even that, and that was a wholesome kind of teenage show. I wouldn't even say, I think you get worse shows than that. And even that, if I now reflect on it, their perception and talking about it is not how you want your child's perception to be about sex and making those decisions.
Absolutely. And even if on the flip side, not only the miseducation they're going to get, but also they see let's take movies, for example, PG-13, they see this way of love and relationships in such a Hollywood romanticized way that's not reality. And it also sets them up for failure because they go into a relationship and their boyfriend doesn't just know what they're thinking. And he doesn't know what flowers to buy her. And he doesn't know all these things that the movies just make out. It's so easy. And it doesn't teach them that healthy communication. It doesn't teach them any of that. And so if they're getting that information from a movie and they're not hearing from their parent after that movie saying, oh, it's so funny how, in that movie, it made it out like everything's perfect. Did you know for dad to learn to buy me flowers, I had to ask him, and that happens for everyone, and that's normal, and to be able to bring these conversations in all the time actually creates that healthy space for the children, and not live in this world of fantasy and Hollywood, which is unattainable, unrealistic, and it takes so much more work and it leads to so much more disappointment than just having a healthy relationship.
Well, I was actually a little bit disappointed when I lost my virginity that there wasn't some kind of powerful light that came and shined on me while I was experiencing this, because that's how I thought it was like going to be this life-changing experience. And that was obviously not what it was necessarily. But yes, So what are some of the benefits? I mean, I think we've covered the benefits, obviously, of this talk. But when should we start now? Let's talk about when should we start having this talk. You mentioned earlier already birth, that we should start about it. But how? How are we going to start? Because I think that's also the misconception, is that people think that when we're talking, but I think you've already enlightened us today, is that the fact is that when we talk about the talk or sex, it's not talking about the physical necessarily act of having sex. That's not what you're going to be talking to your
exactly.
2-year-old about.
The conversation is not just the biological, what happens. It's way more than that. And if anyone just has the biological talk, they're setting their child up for even more failure, because only having that talk and knowing just that, I mean, that sexual relationship is not going to be satisfying. It's not going to be healthy. It's not going to be good, right? So sex is way more than just penis and vagina. It is so much more than that, and it comes back all the way to the age of birth. And where does this come from? Like, how does it come into that? From the age of birth, you're going to be showing your children. I mean, I don't want to go into too many examples and things, because this is why I created a guide for parents to give you these practical tools and examples. But just an example.
And I don't think we have enough time anyway to talk about every single
it wouldn't. But just an example that from birth we start giving the children the vocabulary of their body parts. The same way we're saying, where's your eyes? We say, where's your tummy? And we teach them, very age appropriate body parts. So you may not be saying, I don't know, like when you're changing their nappy and you're going, oh no, let me clean your coochie. You don't say coochie, you say, let me clean your vagina, right? And even though that child's not actually going to speak back to you or anything like that, you using the correct terminology, you naming their body parts properly, you're creating that safe space of nurture and connection and love and communication with the baby. I'm going to be changing your nappy. I'm going to be taking off your clothes. I'm sorry it's cold, right? Creating that safe space for them. When they hear your loving, nurturing voice throughout this process, it gives them that sense of safety, that security. And that's part of the talk. This is why it's an ongoing conversation, because it's not physically or humanly possible to have all of this conversation at once. And if you do that, you're setting someone up for so much disappointment, so much failure, and so much like a heartache along the way, instead of a natural, easy transition. That safe, secure space.
And it is, and I mean, the bonding that comes with this type of conversations and open and honest conversations with your children, especially as they get better or bigger, is really, honestly, for me, one of the most rewarding things, to be able to actually share this with especially my daughter, to be honest, because we obviously have a lot more in common with certain things that happen and progress. And I really love that. If you've just joined us, you are on 101.9 High FM. This is Bump and Beyond, and I'm your host, Yolandi Becker, and I'm speaking to Galya Falkson about talking sex and sexuality with our children and the importance thereof and how we can do it better. Maybe you were lucky enough that your parents had a good talk with you, but share those experiences with us. We would love for you to share in this conversation. You can, of course, phone us on 010-140-3020, or send us a message on Telegram on 061 895 1019. And of course, you can also SMS us on 34519. SMSs are charged at R1.50 per SMS. We've now mentioned about starting the conversation of body parts and with our babies. But how kind of, as we progress, then how does it become that we're talking a lot more about the sex part? When kind of give us the highlights. We don't have to give every detail about every single talk with every child, but give us kind of how this will progress as your child gets older.
So as it progresses, you move into things like keeping secrets, why it's important to not keep secrets, what's the difference between private parts and something being private and something being a secret. That's very important for children to understand the difference between, that then bring in ways to prevent sexual abuse and to help your children identify grooming and what grooming actually is, and not this like ridiculous portrayal that some people in the media are putting it out to be these days. So that is where, my guide would be very helpful in terms of explaining grooming, etc. Then between the ages
that's also an interesting conversation now that you mentioned that, because there's also studies that show that kids are less likely to be targeted by predators if they use actual words like vagina and penis and don't have these little words that sometimes we use, like you mentioned the word coochie. My mom never used the word coochie, but we all have, lots of people have in different languages different words for this, the rose and I don't know what all. And there's actually research that shows that predators are less likely to engage with. I don't think it's going to stop them necessarily, but they are less likely if your child is more open about these type of things and verbally able to say these things as well. But anyway, I interrupted you. You mentioned now that's the next phase.
Well, that's one of the incredibly important points. When your child has the knowledge and education around being aware of abuse, they are very much more likely to say something that's going to turn anyone who's trying to groom a child off. They're going to move to that innocent child who knows nothing, because that's a better victim. So the more empowered your child is, the safer they are. And, from the ages of between like 5 and 8, there's going to be the natural, healthy ways of expression and sexual self-expression that children are going to start experimenting with, and knowing and understanding what is healthy and what is not as a parent is incredibly important, so that you can then guide them through that process without creating shame or embarrassment or picking up on anything that is inappropriate to protect them from that. And then the actual mechanics of conception and the different aspects of sex can start to actually come in between the ages of 7, 8, right? And age appropriately. So you're not going into full on detail, but if a child says to you, "Mommy, how did that baby get in your tummy?" You're having a second child, and your younger kid says to you, "Mommy, how did the baby get in your tummy?" You don't go, "Oh, God put it there." Yeah, okay, you need to give them a little bit more information by that age. Maybe at the age of 3, you can say, Hashem put the baby in my tummy. But at the age of 8, you can't answer like that, because they know that it's not enough information, and they're going to be more curious, and they're going to seek out that information. So, creating that space where you can actually have an age-appropriate conversation with them, to be able to say, "Oh, that's such a great question," and start explaining it in that age-appropriate way is incredibly important. So there's you can go into the science a little, using just the basics. Oh, inside a mommy, she has a uterus, and the baby grows inside the uterus. Is there anything else you have questions on? Oh, but then the kid says, "But how does it get into the uterus?" And then you add on information based on their questions, based on where their curiosity is. Ask them what they know. What do you already know? Have you seen anything, or did someone tell you anything? Okay, well, that's important, that point, etc. And you take on what they know, and you add the accurate information onto that. So as your child matures, and each child will mature differently. Some 7-year-olds are absolutely not ready, and others are like more than ready to hear everything, right? So it's very much about knowing your child and almost getting that sense of like, can they handle this conversation maturely, and then giving them concrete answers and using your discretion through that.
And I mean, this is really like, I mean, you mentioned now like the 5 to 8 year olds as well. With my kids, we I have a boy and a girl, so certain conversations kind of also naturally, especially around, I would already say like 3 years started, where, you know, like my daughter would notice that her brother has a penis and she doesn't have one. And I think even just those type of situations where they see the differences between what they are and what someone else has, I think is so important for them to learn.
Absolutely.
Body awareness, and that's part of the talk, part of the progression, how something happens. And with both my children, as well as you're now mentioning with the older ones, it was a very kind of different conversation of how curious and how not curious they are about it. My son was way too young. He was like 2 when I had my daughter. So I think he just said, I told him the baby was in my belly, and he never asked how did it get there or anything. I just remember at the end, he asked me, how did the baby get out? And then I said, through my vagina. And then he looked at me like, huh? And he was like confused a little bit, but I said, I kind of asked him about it, and he didn't care. He was happy with that information. My daughter then later asked me about it because I had a friend who was pregnant, and when I told her like the baby comes out of the vagina, her face she was completely shocked and worried. The facial expression is like, what? This cannot be. I'm like, yes, but you have to remember that your body changes. And it's built to do that. So you don't have to worry about it. It's not, you're way too young to push any baby out of your vagina. So don't be worried about it. But it's interesting also how those kind of questions progress. We do actually have from Murray and Joseph, she's asking a question. Should mothers talk to their sons, or should fathers do this? A grandma Marion. It is a good question.
It's a very good question. And I believe that the conversation should be split. It shouldn't just come from one parent. Different aspects can come from both parents. So, you know, like you said, when your son asked you, he was shocked. And also your daughter had that same response, you know, it comes out where. So sometimes it's about building up to giving them information that you know might be scary for them. So you say, well, it's an incredible thing. You know how mommy's explained to you about the woman's body, how like, you know, you're going to develop breasts and these things are going to happen. So one of the things that you develop is hips, and your hips have this special way of opening. And if a mommy's hips can't open, a doctor can also take the baby out of her tummy, right? So before you explain, oh, the hair now pushes through a vagina, you're kind of giving them a little bit more information so they're feeling a bit more safe. They're feeling a bit more ready to hear this information.
See, you're much better at this conversation than what I was, but we're going to add on to this just now.
But I think what you did was, it was very good. It was still very good, but just to normalize that anxiety.
I'm pretty sure I did normalize it, but what I said, I cannot remember. But we're getting onto this just now.
This is Bump and Beyond with Yolandi Becker, the show about pregnancy and babies. 101.9 megahertz of life.
Yes, this is 101.9 Chai FM. I am Yolandi Becker, the host of Bump and Beyond, and today we are talking sex and sexuality with our children and how to have that talk, or now we've realized the continuous talk of body awareness, sexuality with our children. And if you've missed this, don't worry too much, luckily, because we are strongly running out of time. But don't worry. Remember that this and all of our other shows are available as podcasts on chaifm.com. So please don't worry and go share this with your friends so that they can also be enlightened and informed on how to have this very important conversation. Before we went to the ad break, Marion sent in the question of grandma. She calls herself Grandma Marion. So thank you, Grandma Marion, for sending in the question. She was asking should dads be having the talk with their son and should moms be having the talk? And I think definitely I agree with the fact that certain aspects, I obviously know a bit more about vaginas and periods than my husband. So I feel it's an appropriate conversation for me to have with my daughter. But in the same breath, I definitely speak about sex and sexuality as well with my son. And part of the reason, I mean, there's various reasons why I probably do it, just because I am open and honest also with him. but also because I want him to be respectful of women and our sexuality as well. And that respect and confidence to operate in that arena, I feel, will come from me as well. So I don't know, what's your idea about that?
I want to just, add to that. I think you're 100% right, but I also want to say that even more so, if you want to teach your children healthy sexuality, especially if you're trying to speak about relationships, if you only have the same gender teaching you about that specific gender, you're almost missing out on the aspect and the connection of relationships that is important in order to have a healthy sex life. So for a father to only have conversations with his sons, how's he going to have healthy then conversations with a female around this? In essence, actually, your husband should know about periods and things so that your daughter can say, Dad, can you give me tampons, right? And it shouldn't be weird for her to be able to ask that, because she knows that dad knows about periods, and it's not a weird thing to dad, and it's a healthy, normal thing and part of the body. And there shouldn't be that, those adverts of the father in the shop not knowing what pads to buy, and he buys the giant large ones for after giving birth to a baby for his 12-year-old daughter. No, that's absolutely ignorance, and those men should be educating themselves and should be taking responsibility for the fact that they had a child. If you're going to have a child, you should need to be able to educate them. Don't go and say, oh, I don't know what pads to buy. That's the mother's job. It's not. You had a child and you're responsible for that child. And it's the same for the mother. If you have a son, you're responsible for that son too. And you're responsible for teaching them everything, as well as both parents. So yes, like we said, it's not a talk. It's not one talk. It's an ongoing conversation. And parts of this conversation are going to be had by different parents. And that is perfect and beautiful. If you're in the car with your son, mother to son, and he asks you a question, you answer it. And if then the son asks dad a question, he answers it. And if he doesn't know, he can say, let's ask mom together, kind of thing. But it should never be, and I'm very passionate about this, it should never be that only one gender speaks to the other, because you're not teaching that safety, that closeness that can come from just it being natural and healthy. And the minute it becomes like, I only can talk about this with my mom, again, you're creating shame and secrecy around it, which is not the reality, and it shouldn't be the reality, because you're actually setting them up for way more issues.
No, and I mean, it really is. I mean, just now also you talking about it, for me also reminds me of, like that. Even I remember, and I mean, it wasn't, my husband is actually also quite open about these things. And I remember also feeling awkward when we just got together to tell him, listen here, please, can you buy me some tampons? Which I shouldn't feel awkward about. I mean, obviously he was like, sure, of course I'll do it. No problem. Which ones? And the pink one, or I can't even remember. But I was actually feeling a little bit, but in the same breath, I was also like, obviously he knows when I'm on my period. So I don't know why I felt embarrassed. But again, that's the type of situations that we want to avoid with our children, because it's just like buying toilet paper. We all do it, or 50% in this case, more than, because we are more women than men, but a crap load of us have periods. So deal with it. That's the reality of the world. But there is you've also mentioned now the different phases of talking with our children and the continuous conversation. And I think that's the biggest takeaway for today for me, is the fact that it should be, it's not the talk, it's a conversation from small to older. And again, it also, in that sense, it makes it also a little bit less pressure, I feel, for a parent. Because even if you mess it up a little bit along the way, you can always rectify it if there's an ongoing conversation. Because sometimes you do say things or encounter people. I had a thing the other day about it where I didn't know how to address the person. And afterwards, it actually opened up a conversation with my kids about it. But in any way, but a specific question that I wanted you to answer, and I hope you are going to answer it, because we talked about when kids ask, where do babies come from initially? How would you answer that? Because I explained it to my parents.
What age child?
I'm not talking like a young kid. Like I'm saying like between that 5 to 8 years. Kind of thing. If they're asking you, where does a baby come from? How would you answer? I remember telling my kids also, I said, the vagina and the penis is like puzzle pieces that kind of fit together. And there's a seed and an egg. And from that, a baby grows within the mom's belly. That's kind of how I explained it.
So if a 5-year-old asks the question, we don't really speak about penis and vagina fitting together because they can't comprehend that so much yet. So at 5 years old, you're going to basically just say exactly what you said, that a mommy has an egg in her tummy and a daddy gives her the seed, and then it goes together and it grows into a baby, and it grows in her uterus, using that terminology. And then then as they get older, they'll say, okay, but how did the seed get from daddy to mommy? How does he give it to her? And then you start creating the conversation about the puzzle pieces. But it has to be a healthy build up, in the sense that the child isn't almost like being shocked with too much information. And that's part of the conversation, is being able to just take a step back and have a conversation that says, this is a little bit of information, this is more information, this is more information. Okay, it all fits together. When I finally told he's 9 years old now, but we had the conversation about a year ago, when I finally, and I used books and I used different aids to explain what I'm saying. When I finally told him about everything fitting together, he was like, oh, that's so cool. And I was like, you think it's cool? In my head, I was like freaking out. I was like, what is happening? Why is he really responding positively to this? It's supposed to be awkward and shameful and negative. What is happening? And I was like, okay, yes, it is quite cool. And then, building on that, when he's a little bit older, he'll ask about pleasure and like, does it feel nice? Or what happens? Is it uncomfortable? And then you build on that and you create those healthy understandings, so that for them, they know exactly what their body is capable of. And the fact that they can know that is so empowering. The fact that someone can understand that her period is something that's incredibly empowering and not a shameful, dirty thing, then it's amazing. When anything's taught in a shameful, secretive way, it makes you feel like it is bad, dirty, naughty. Stay away from it. And then the curious child who is seeking extra stimulation, extra expression, extra whatever, then that's where they're going to seek it, because they don't understand it. As opposed to, if they understood it, they know how to healthily approach it within themselves, within just even reading a book more about it, quelling that curiosity, instead of having to seek ways of expressing that curiosity in an unhealthy
is already way. Telling me again that we're running out of time. We're going to have a whole nother conversation about this, but just more about this just now after this break.
This is Bump and Beyond with Yolandi Becker, the show about pregnancy and babies. 101.9 megahertz of life.
And so once again, another great show is coming to an end, and it was a great one. If you've missed it, don't worry, because luckily the podcast will be available on highfm.com afterwards. And this and all of our other shows, and of course, all the other shows we have on High FM, you can go listen at your own time when you feel like it. Educate, even if you just want to recap again some of the things that were shared, because sometimes things are not relevant in the moment that we hear it, but you might find benefit of it, especially this parenting journey a little bit later. Galya, this has been really great. And if you've just joined me, you know that you wouldn't know that I've been speaking to Galya Falkson about sex and sexuality with our children, and having that ongoing conversation with our children. I, in the beginning of the show, mentioned if you're not following her yet, you need to follow her on Instagram at Galya Falkson. Because it's really great, insightful things about sex and relationships and educating our children as well. So it's a variety of topics that you talk about, which is fantastic and super entertaining as well, by the way. Lots of the videos are great. But yes, the big thing as well is that you've made our life easier, and you created actually a guide that we can follow to have this ongoing conversation with our children. Tell us a little bit about the guide and where we can find it.
Thank you for mentioning it. It is, it's called it's a parent's guide specifically for parents. The guide is basically an amazing it's my baby. It took me a really long time to complete. It's called The Complete Parent's Guide for Children of All Ages, Developing a Healthy Relationship with Sex. And the guide, I'll just kind of give you a little bit of the table of contents.
Yeah.
It's basically talking about the conversation, having that ongoing conversation for each stage of your child's life. So there's a stage of 0 to 3, 3 to 8, 9 to 11. It speaks about consent, abuse. Then the age of 12 to 18, it speaks about puberty and the different topics that parents need to address by what age, and what are the things that they need to bring into each of those topics, how to have the conversation starters, points, tips, tricks, etc. It's also has resources at the end, as well as being endorsed by professionals in this field like Luke Lambrecht, Leonard Carr, and Tova Goldstein. So not only is it a massive work of a labor of love from our part, but it's also been endorsed and by huge professionals in this team. And it says so much to me that this is an important conversation, and this is something that needs to be had, and this is something that needs to be had in this framework. My guide is just an idea. It's a framework. It gives you the space and the tips, and you will take that framework and you will implement it into your child's life in your own way. It is not a rule book. It is not a rule book. It is a guide. And that's important, that we all know that it is something that we can use to help educate our children that much better, to be able to talk about puberty, to be able to talk about the changes that are going to happen in our bodies, to be able to feel empowered and our children to feel safe to come and say to us, oh, mommy, I'm feeling so weird about this change that just happened in my body, or what is this thing on my face, and being able to say, oh, my baby, remember I told you about that thing called acne? Look, that is what acne looks like. And oh, okay, and remember what I told you about treating it? It's about washing your face with soap. Okay, cool. It's about just having those healthy spaces that when changes and things happen in their body, it is so natural and safe for them that when they become an adult and they have a sexual relationship and they're able to make these decisions, it is safe, they're protected, they're consensual. It is a loving, nurturing space with open and honest conversation with your partner, because that is key to having that healthy sexual space.
Oh, Galya, this has been a wonderful. Everyone grab that. You need to go grab that guide immediately.
It's available on my website,
great.
www.galyafalkson.com.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for joining me again today. And remember to also join me next week as I talk to pediatric chiropractor Dr. Catherine Falkenberg, obvious about chiropractic. It's been a fantastic show, as always, with all of you. The world is changed by our example, not by our opinion. Let's lead by example for our children. Thank you so much for joining me. Until next time, enjoy your day.